So this you can Google too. If you have not seen it, it's a great article. It's only 5 pages. It's written for ergonomics and design, which is, as you know, relatively lay audience. It's a magazine that's really designed for anyone in human factors. So even if you're studying biomechanics and you know nothing about XYZ topic, you can still understand it. If you're studying, I don't know what, transportation specifically, you can still understand this from these articles because they're written to that level. They're not like a journal. The journal's very technical, and not like my wife can read it through it and get the gist of it pretty easily too. She is not in human factors directly, although she knows a bit just because of what I've been doing over the years. So I'm basing it heavily on this. I did add some things of my own that I kind of prefer or that weren't mentioned. So again, we're back to what's our purpose. Our purpose is really about guidelines. And what is PowerPoint? How it should be used? Grab something in my bag here. Don't look. So the question is, what is in the box that he's holding? And he's holding a bunch of tools. And that's the idea. PowerPoint is really a tool. I mean, we rely on it heavily for presentations because they're so powerful. But in theory, you should be able to give your presentation without it. Especially if, worst case, the power went out or my computer crashed or something, and you were scheduled for an hour talk. I could hold this up. I could show you my printout of the article. I could show you my a book I brought on good writing. And those 3 props right there could get me through an hour talk if I had to. It's a worst case scenario. You might bring out slides that are printed out, and maybe you have one that's in color that's big enough to hold up. But it's a tool that we can use. It's along with other tools, paint programs. You use whatever you want, Illustrator, etc. Word, of course, is where you write your papers in originally. Lots of others out there, but those are just some examples. It's just one of many in our arsenal. So we really want to think about it, and the paper talks about 3 uses for PowerPoint. It's really to be clear. We use it to help clarify our message. We want to be informative, at the same time teach people about what our paper was about, and increase the impact of what we're talking about. If it interferes with what we're talking about, you might as well just not even turn it on. So that's really kind of the guiding point here. So again, what's our purpose today? We're talking about guidelines. Obviously, I'm hammering that just to kind of get that in your head, how important that is. So guidelines, there's 5 of them that I'll cover, and actually sort of a 6th one I'll throw in there, but these are just a quick outline of where we're going. We're talking about these 5 things. A lot of these are things you've studied before. You know a lot about this, but I wanted to kind of go over them because sometimes we know about stuff, but we don't necessarily apply it to our own work. So font, there's lots of things to look at. What kind of style, size, case, and spacing. So the paper recommends Tahoma, which is good for short bullets. It's a sans serif font, which means it doesn't have the little feet at the bottom, and it's highly legible. For short bullets, it's great. Arial's pretty good too. Verdana, this is another one they mentioned. And after a while, they kind of look all the same to me. I mean, these few are pretty much the same. There's no little feet on them. They're pretty easy to read, especially in bullets. Times New Roman is great for papers, for text, for paragraphs. Here I'll give you just a second to read that. Research shows that it's easier to read when it has little feet. It just helps along. That's why newspapers use Times New Roman most of the time. And they can get away with pretty small fonts as well. You rarely want to use anything much longer than that on a presentation. Font size, they recommend 32. I think this is actually 44 on the top. At least 22 for bullets, 16 for figureheads, and that's just kind of a quick showing of demonstration of the different font sizes. In this room, we could all get away with 16 pretty well, but at Human Factors, with 100 people in the room, you can imagine this being about this big, and people in the back who can't hear you because they're over 70 years old and have hearing issues, just because we all have that as we get older, and can't see as well. You probably want to think about the 24, 28, and above, I think. But again, in a small room like this, the 16 is not bad. Font man likes 44, especially for the the headings. For cases, I kind of alluded to this already, but you can use sentence case, which means your first letter should be capitalized. Research shows it's just easier to read, easier to follow. And it helps directing attention towards which way it's going. And this is plain old Tahoma here for spacing. Impact or something like that is harder to read. You could, again, in this case, it doesn't look so bad, but it's harder than the one above it. This is one I mentioned. I don't know how you say it, kitey, but it spreads. It's just for some reason it spreads them out. It's just a little weird. And then they talk about embellishments, which is italics and bold, but really they want you to limit those for emphasis. And I think they work. Oh yeah, avoid these things. They're just annoying. And they're kind of cute. And when PowerPoint is 30 years old. But when it first started adding these things in, people just thought they were the greatest things in sliced bread, and they're annoying. Especially if you're trying to focus people on your purpose, which is in this case a clear presentation. Color is really great in limited use, but the bottom line is they're recommending high contrast combinations. Again, if you were 200 feet away from this, could you still see it? And I think black and white is pretty good, obviously. Something dark on something light is the best. You don't want to get into really big contrast, which I'll show you in a second. Black and white is the best. There's just a classic example of black on white. And this is modeled after the paper. And of course, this could work in certain situations. They recommend this in a dark room with no lights on, for example, like a movie. And then gray could work, especially if you're in a really bright room. Gray might help us a little bit. It's more designed for like a computer screen, and they say it would reduce eye strain to have something grayish versus a bright white. And that's where a lot of these recommendations come from, is computer use, because there really hasn't been any research done specifically on PowerPoint and presentations. But the gray is a good option. I usually use black and white though. It's a little boring, but you can spice it up with some color and pictures. So there's some gray. You can see it's obviously a little lighter. And then black on white is best, but you could use complementary colors in most cases. So there's just some quick examples there. We got yellow there. So the blue is, from a distance you can't tell it's blue. It looks like black pretty much, but it's still pretty good contrast. It's a little bit lower contrast, but it's still pretty good. And you really want to avoid these for lots of reasons. 3 to 5% of males especially are colorblind and could not even see that green in the blue, in the red. And it's just kind of annoying. I mean, you can read it, but it's not the best contrast. You would probably agree. Can anyone read that? Everyone read that? Anyone not read it? You've seen these before, I'm sure. This is what it looks like to someone who's colorblind. Not the gray, but just the fact there's no difference between, they can't see that green 5 in there. And even if you can see it, it's not crystal clear. You can see it close up, but that's really what you're trying to get at, something that pops. Okay, I know I'm going quickly, but I'll go for 7 more minutes. I talked in the paper about guidelines, and again, a lot of these are things you know about from good human factors design. Anything, whether it's a device, make my buttons all the same size so it's sort of consistent. A computer screen with a GUI on a website, you want to try to put the logo the same place on every page so people kind of expect it there. If there's a certain section you always give your menu at, you always keep the menu in the same place, those kind of things. So we want to do the same thing with slides. Hopefully most of my slides, you've noticed they're pretty much predictable. There's always going to be a heading on top, and then the bullets are pretty much the same basic location. Leave a margin, and this could, I put the copyright on the bottom just outside on purpose because it does get cut off. It's not the end of the world, but you want to think about a margin. It might be a little tighter, a little further, but you probably don't want to put important stuff up here. You want to keep it inside, especially if you've probably seen this before. Someone has a projector set up, and it's just right in the edge, and a little bit goes off the edge, and you're missing something there. So this would protect. They can even project from here in, and I'm still safe. To maximize comprehension, just like you're writing a paper, you want to have a single purpose, a topic sentence, we call it, in a paragraph, right? A good paragraph says something, here's what the rest of the paragraph is going to talk about. We've all seen it, we've all done it. We've written paragraphs that are this long, you know, and they have multiple purposes in that paragraph. So the same thing with our slides. And again, I'm probably being extreme here, because sometimes you do want to have more than one purpose, but the general guideline is go for one. So it's really about having, to maximize comprehension, you have one purpose for one slide. I'll let you read that. So as it says, use bullets, not multi-line paragraphs. For a variety of reasons, both ergonomic and rhetorical, the slide should be a collection of short bullets that assist you in making the presentation. This recommendation will also help you avoid the urge to read the slides as your presentation. Now in this case, when you're giving a verbatim quote that you haven't memorized, I think it's okay to read it long. The audience is reading it anyways. Why don't you just walk them through it, take the 30 seconds it takes to go ahead and show them what you're talking about. It's a great plug again for his article, and it shows again to them exactly where you got it. So the reason I'm doing this, of course, I want you guys to go read the article. I didn't write it, but I think it's a great article. And you can share it with people who are not human factors that can still understand this stuff and improve their presentations. And again, you see here we use Times New Roman, kind of helps you read along. And it's very big. I think this is 24 font or so, maybe bigger. Use bullets, as it says. Be affirmative in your bullets. Don't talk about bad things, talk about good things. It just, and in the active voice, this is what I did today versus this is what I had done in the past. You don't want to talk about it that way. That's what the research shows. It's just easier to understand, and it increases comprehension when you're talking about a presentation. You've heard of Miller's, what was it, 7 plus or minus 2 or 1? Miller's magic number 7? They recommend 4. You sometimes can go more than that, but avoid distractions. I don't know if you think this helps or not, but again, it kind of, in this case, plugs you back to the pitch man idea. It may or may not be helping you, but some kind of moving image, or I saw a picture the other day of a guy that wasn't even relevant to the talks, and I was like, why do you put the picture in there at all? So if you're going to use pictures, that's great, or images, but make sure that they sort of support your purpose and aid in comprehension here. These are cool. 3D is really neat, but Chris Wickens and others have talked about 3D specifically in showing data, and they show several times that this is much easier to understand than that. At a glance, you can tell there's 2 series here, and they compare very, that's twice the size of that. You can tell that at a glance. Here it's not quite as crystal clear. You can do it, but you got to do a little bit of up here and then back down, and it's just harder to deal with. So they recommend this. And in the ideal situation, you're not throwing this right away. You might show this as an overview, and then you might walk them through them one at a time and talk about how they compare. The nice thing about that is it helps someone who's never seen your data understand it better, and they can comprehend it. It takes you about as long to say, spend 4 minutes on the slide explaining it all than it does to take 5 seconds here, 5 seconds here, 5 seconds here, 5 seconds here, etc. Of course, you may add the actual number on top here as another aid. And of course, you'd have real categories here, but I just showed this example. This is cut and paste straight from the screenshot from the article. Just another example of some of these things. One thing that he talks about is going ahead and labeling this dashed blue line and green solid line. It's kind of silly, but if this was in black and white, it would help a lot. You just understand there's 2 different categories here. It's kind of redundant, but it's a way to explain it as well. And then he reminds us 14 point, at the very minimum, I think he said 16 earlier, is really what you want to use on a graph like this. You probably don't want to go much smaller if you're trying to aid in comprehension here. And then, of course, as you saw earlier with me, I went ahead and put texture in the blue. It's kind of redundant. It's blue and pink, but it kind of just gives another level of redundancy that's clearly different from the pink. And then the other thing that he talks about, he and colleagues talks about, is putting a legend up here. It's kind of I never thought about that, but you know traditionally the legend is over here somewhere or hidden down here or whatever. This just kind of helps because again you're so familiar with this data, you know what pink is and you know what blue is, but your audience doesn't. And for them to have to move their eyes back and forth from here to here instead of just boom boom, it just makes it a little easier for them to comprehend it. They're spending less energy looking on the corner of your slide and more energy understanding it. So again, these are straight from that paper, and I think they're nice examples. So there is more, but I think I'm going to stop. Well, I'll show you some quick ones, quick makeovers that I worked on, and I won't spend a lot of time. I'm going to show you them. Like you said, if you have to need to go, that's fine. Any questions so far about all this?
Just a quick question about the last two graphs that you showed with the PowerPoint with the moving the legend into the middle.
Yeah.
Do you have to worry about like APA guidelines and things like that with your audience, or is that kind of change okay?
That's a good question. Does APA have a guideline about legends?
I'm not sure.
It's like, you know,
They may have a
the
preference.
text goes above tables but below pictures, that kind of stuff, but I don't think it really matters. Presentations.
Yeah, I think in your paper you might need to put it in a certain location.
Okay,
Yeah, and that's actually it's an interesting balancing point because you're dealing with standardization, which is it helps readers know from paper to paper it's always here.
For paper.
Okay.
Now you could argue the same way with presentations. That I'm expecting to see the legend down here, where it's always down here. You know, so that's an interesting question. We'll have to learn about it, figure that out. I would say for now, especially if Chris Wickens and others have talked about it, I think it's probably pretty safe to do it. But I would say in a paper you want to check with the editors or whoever you need to make sure that's appropriate.